welcome back to me, my CTO and I. We're the podcast where we take apart the many forms and aspects of being a CTO and we explore what really goes on behind the scenes. Andrew Weaver here, CEO at CTO Academy, and as ever joined again by my friend, co-host, I should say, all-round tech guru, Sanjay Mistry. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Good to be back. Good to be back.
Excellent. I'm going to ask you what's happening in your world. Let me tell you a nice little nugget for you here. So one of the things I love about CTO Academy is our community, and we have as you know, because you host some of them, we have lots of peer-to-peer sessions where there's a kind of cross-pollination of ideas and best practice. Here's a kooky little bit of best practice for your in-office days. So one of our attendees, Chris Tasker, works for a company called Fivium in London, sitting in his boardroom, and as we were talking to him, he got handed a cup of coffee, which is really cool. And they have a little rule, Sanjay, where on their office days, if someone's having a meeting, another member of the team will bring them a beverage. Isn't that lovely?
I love that. I think that's such a great rule. It's such a great rule. I am very fortunate that when I work from home and it's tea time, so British tea time, my wife will bring me a cup of tea, even if I'm mid-flight. I love it. It's a nice treat, right? It's a nice treat.
Well, it's quite funny. So that I'm going to tell you a very quick anecdote within the CTO Academy team. So my co-founder Jason, we both kind of work from home, and there's now become this running joke that when we do our stand-up, his wife, without coming on screen, the hand just appears with a cup of coffee. so it's the same with our team, but his wife does it, and it's partly to wind me up as I sit here without a beverage on my stand-ups. Anyway, enough of this frivolous talk. Anything else been going on in your world, Sanjay?
So the big thing, and it was an interesting reflection, was the art of negotiation came back and hit me in the face this week. So and so live incident. So it was lights blazing, and it wasn't. So there is a technical incident, but actually it's the commercial impact of this challenge. So it's a edge case, but impacting very senior people at our partner. So we have to take it very seriously. So we get onto a call with our partner, so the technology partner, and we figure out the root cause, and the root cause is on their side. So it's like, okay, so I'm sitting there waiting for them to go, right, we're going to put a fix in. And no, that didn't come back. So there was a lot of negotiation around who is going to work the most amount of technology to get a fix in. So one of my team was on the call, and he kind of he broke in the silence. He kind of gave a solution, and unfortunately, as we've kind of dug into that, we can't do that. But what it does come back to, and I was messaging this partner this morning, trying to negotiate a change to this technical solution, and I was trying to be as diplomatic as possible. So even as a technologist, the art of negotiation is so important, because at the end of the day, we need to get a fix out, because I have a live incident. So, but trying to make sure it's done in the correct way, and making sure we don't put too much tech debt back into our platform is so important. So, yeah, that's my world at the moment.
Got it. We've mentioned, I think, in a previous episode, actually, around you never stop selling. The more senior you get, you never stop selling or negotiating or,
Correct.
coming to a compromise. It's just part of the deal as you get into
really
a
is.
senior role. Now, before we dive any deeper into this latest episode, I want to just take a moment to thank our wonderful sponsors at Mixpanel, Anna and the team, and the EMEA team, and Amy, based over in California. They're going absolute gangbusters. They also, we're very lucky to have them as our sponsors of the podcast and also our global events. And it's a nice kind of alignment in the sense that we have a very global community here. We're in over 100 countries, and we know that Mixpanel also, I think whether your team's in London, New York, Lagos, Sydney, etc., their analytics work everywhere that your product does. And what I would say is that it lets CTOs just keep a finger on the pulse of real users wherever they are, surfacing insights that help you grow anywhere on the map. So if you're building for a global audience or hoping to, Mixpanel has got your back with the analytics. Sanjay, we've both been beneficiaries of the sponsorship from Mixpanel. We did an event together in Amsterdam, but that global reach that they have is quite phenomenal.
It's good, and beyond their global reach, they're very cognizant of where people are based. So we use them primarily across Africa, so Europe and Africa, and they've updated their tooling, so the code that collects the data to be very good with low latency environments, right? So for us, that makes a huge difference. What we don't want to do is miss data, right? Especially across the continent. So yeah, I think they've got this compassion of what their users need, across the globe, because it is different, right? And I think that's what makes them special.
Awesome. Well, we're very pleased and privileged to have them as our sponsor. So thank you once again to Mixpanel. Now I'm going to do something, Sanjay, to you that most Premier League teams will do. I'm going to go for a mid-season pivot. You think it's right for a mid-season pivot?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So we are going to discontinue a couple of features that we've really enjoyed hosting, and the quiz being the main one. Anybody who has watched episode 3 will know that there was a reason we didn't host the quiz in the last episode. And actually the feedback that we got, Sanjay, was really positive about our kind of longer introduction. So we're going to kind of focus more now on the longer introduction and taking a bit of a dive into certain topics. So thank you very much to everybody who competed on the quiz. There were some fine meals in various restaurants around the world that were enjoyed by quiz winners. So thank you to everybody. It may well come back in a different form, but for now we are going to drop it for the next few episodes. But it does prompt a question, Sanjay. Does a pivot ever work?
Oh, I like the segue. That's a great segue, Andrew. A pivot can work 100%, and I've been in businesses where we have done them and they've worked, and I've been in businesses where we've tried them and they've completely failed. For me, it's the execution. So, and again, it comes from not just from a technology point of view, but from a business and income point of view. So where it's not worked, whereas we've tried to pivot too quickly. So this was where the business was established. We saw that the business model was dying, and we knew we needed to pivot away. So the business pivoted as fast as the technology could, which was pretty rapid, but that was the wrong answer for the business. Okay, and actually we ended up having to backtrack. So the pivot did eventually work, but we lost a lot of time having to backtrack. Where I've seen the best success personally is we, again, from a business point of view, recognize that business model needed to be changed. We then developed the technology, we started testing it in parallel, and we started pivoting this idea in parallel, and our transition was more sensible. So, it took best part of 12 months to start transitioning the business over to the new pivoted idea, even though the technology had been around for all of that period. So I think, my advice, my learning is really you may be able to do it from a technology point of view very rapidly, but what is the impact on your business model, your customers, your revenue? And you need to bear that in mind. And I think as a technology leader, we need to be cognizant of all of those things as well, and not just be deep down in the technology side of the decisioning tree.
Well, I'm impressed that you've used cognizant twice in this one episode. So I'm going to ban it for a third time. But thank you very much for that. So here are my quick reflections, and I don't have the same level of experience that you do, but I've been involved in a startup which didn't pivot quick enough. So recognizing the right moment for a pivot is crucial. I cut my teeth on a startup that was doing pretty well, but we just ran out of gas at the wrong time, and it all ended up folding. And I watched, you certainly as a founder watch these things. I watched someone who had launched at the same time, pivot at the right time. and they are still surviving and doing very well. So recognizing the right moment for a pivot is absolutely crucial. Managing team sentiment and buy-in during a pivot, you've got to, it comes down to communication, which often is at the core of a lot of what we talk about, but communicating that pivot effectively, highlight the importance of why you're doing it, and hopefully they've been on the journey with you already, so they know a little bit about the trouble you might be in. But there are lots of personal and emotional factors, as always, in that kind of strategic change. And here's the other quick thing, Sanjay. The statistics on success of pivots is low, which is why I opened up with that question. People do leave it too late, and I think McKinsey did a survey that said only about 20 or 30% of them are successful. It's particularly a problem with more established businesses. So in my wearing a separate hat in a former life, I was involved in the kind of corporate finance world. And we used to have a saying that if a business is about to turn around, it ain't going to make it because it's generally way too late. And I think there's something desperate as low as 5% of companies that actually manage to turn around serious decline. So it always looks great when you can pick up a business, you can asset strip it or whatever, or however cruel you want to deal with the thing to try and make it survive, but it's tough to make them work. And the very famous ones, PayPal, IBM, Netflix, are probably the most obvious examples, are the exception rather than the rule. So yeah, interesting. I whenever I hear someone's about to pivot or about to do a turnaround, it's going to be a tough road for all of them.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, cool. Okay, listen, moving on. Thank you for that. Who have we got on the Fireside? I think it's an old friend of mine, actually, from the Netherlands.
It's a friend. Yeah, it's 100% a friend of CTO Academy. So I've got Ray Bogman, and we are talking. So Ray's drives innovation within his business, but we've kind of zoomed in on driving innovation in the world of AI, right? And it's a fantastic chat. I think you're going to love it.
Cool. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Sanjay.
Hey Ray, thanks for joining me on this Fireside chat. This is an interesting conversation that we're going to be having. When we were first talking about this podcast, we were talking about innovation, and you rightfully mentioned how do you drive, driving innovation pre and post AI adoption is very, very different. So I'm really excited about this. It's not a conversation about AI, but it's the impact of AI when your job is an innovation job. So let's dive in. What's the difference for you in terms of your observations of driving innovation within a business pre and post AI adoption within that business?
Thanks, NJ. I think it's definitely a really good question to spend some time. Although AI, that's the buzzword that we are currently talking about. But if we're looking at the innovation part, actually, it's kind of funny if we look at, let's say, the speed versus the balance or the strategy we're focusing on. Back in the day, we had the luxury, I'd say, to spend time and do some longer planning cycles. And now sometimes even feels to me on a day-to-day basis like this new feature or solution or language model has come out. It feels like being a Formula One car, riding a race that never stops. Imagine being on Silverstone. I mean, I can imagine after 90 minutes, we are done. But this keeps going on. It feels maybe even like Le Mans, the 24 hours continuous focus doing that. And I think that's really an important one. Other than that, there's a big resource allocation shift. We've seen before we had fixed budgets more or less that were predictable. But now with the ongoing tools, I mean, personally, even this week compared to last week's, like, okay, I need some additional funding, but what? So it keeps going on. So I'm not sure what next week will be or how much budget I will need to do some testing and how to actually use this innovation on a global scale within the organization. Because let's face it, it's a lot of R&D, and every AI has a cost. Let's face it. Other than that, and really this stands out to me, is that it's a talent evolution. Previously we hired specific skills from an innovation standpoint, but now with the adoption and the changing world field on so many things. I mean, maybe I need a data scientist, maybe I need to have an LLM engineer. There's so many things going on in the AI world, and sometimes I just need somebody who can test it, from a QA perspective. And maybe the last one would be for me, it's a customer expectation.
Yes.
I would say, in the beginning, we had something that from an innovation standpoint, we could deliver something in time. But with the AI, I mean, everybody expects something ready to go as of tomorrow. It's like, where do we actually, when do we stop? Well, as I mentioned before, while racing this car on the Le Mans 24, I mean, it never stops. And I think that's the beauty of it, to be honest. So, referring back to the difference, I think pre-AI, everything was kind of fixed. And now we are getting into this never stopping world, which I like. Although sometimes like, okay, let's pause. I got a weekend, but there's so many blogs to follow. It's like, okay, I need to test this next week. How many hours do I actually have in a week to do this? But I guess, to wrap it up, it's new, it's thrilling, but it's also scary.
Yes. I mean, look, one of my observations in terms of especially the kind of innovation side is I've been working with some GPUs. So, AI, you can innovate cheaply. Like there are some SaaS platforms which are $10 a month or $20 a month per user. And it's like, well, it's cheap. You don't, what kind of sign off do we really need for that? Then we started working with some GPUs to process some imagery, and that's $25,000 a month or $50,000 a month. And it's like, hold on, we're just playing. We don't even know what our end goal is. This is just a playground. Yeah, I need to go and speak to the CFO, right? So from a cost perspective, I'm with you, and that shocked me, especially kind of GPU availability and cost, especially if you want the latest GPUs. So very interesting. What I do want to go back to, something that you talked about, and ask you a bit more of a deeper question, is talent. You mentioned there's now a difference of the type of talent you need when innovating, and you mentioned like data scientists or people that know LLMs. What I'm finding interesting while I'm having conversations with people is LLMs have not been around for years, right? So how do you go and find a specific expert with, I see job adverts, 10 years experience in LLMs. Well, they've not been around for 10 years, right? So how are you combating that challenge? What's the struggle there when you're innovating?
That's a really good one. Actually, to be fair, I would say there are two levels. I mean, we have more or less, the prompt engineering and the fine tuning, which is kind of basic, which is possible to do in-house. But when it gets into, the wobbly stuff, which is really detailed, company-based stuff that you want to train upon, pre-train, etc. I mean, then the money starts rinking. I would say having somebody who has more or less played with the bigger models out there and has enough knowledge to say, well, this module, works best for this business case, let's say code engineering, and this one would be best for personalization on content and marketing, whatever solution. So I would say easy on, make sure that you express the business needs as smart as possible. And based on these smart timings, you can, of course, get the talent who has the most information. And to be honest, right now on the internet, there's a lot of information that is out there, which definitely helps to make a good understanding if this would be a good fit or if it's not. And to be fair, I started working with some of the China modules, more or less. And it's kind of funny if you run this on a local Mac, which is already optimized for AI, even these 500 gigabytes of language models are just too heavy. You definitely need to offload this to a data center, and then again the money kicks in. So I would say it's sometimes you need to learn by doing and spend the money against it, but that helps you more or less if you want to hire the talent to say, okay, well, now I need to have this person who would have the most knowledge on pre-training or fine-tuning this specific module for this specific business case.
Yeah, I mean, really interesting point around finding. It's not necessarily finding people that have already got the skill set, because that's forever changing, but it's finding people that are willing to adapt and willing to learn and have that mindset that they can just pick something brand new up and follow it. So that's really interesting. I kind of want to divert again back to kind of something that you said, but kind of allowing our conversation to move on. Is there is this expectation when the word AI comes about, and there's this expectation of speed, right? So for you, what's changing in your world in terms of decision making when you're doing long-term thinking? So for an organization, you're going, right, I'm thinking about a longer-term roadmap of innovation to help the business grow in terms of its products or services or whatever it may be. But what's the decision making that you're going through when you're trying to navigate this AI landscape? Because like you say, it's changing and there is an expectation of speed. So how do you manage that?
Wow. Actually, maybe a funny one to actually get a little bit more hands-on, which I'm actually facing right now in terms of speed and adoption. Technology itself, I would say you can figure out, you can build it. But legislation, funny thing is, um, if we look at the AU law and the way it operates, and actually this law, I think was 2024-ish, or maybe even yeah. And it needs to be implemented across multiple IT companies, whoever works with AI. The funny thing is, let's imagine that we would face technology 5 years from now. I mean, technology-wise, that will probably evolve over time. But the legislation and the way it operates within the company and the restriction it has, funny thing is that, while I'm innovating, it seems that once I start using AI, I need to inform my customers every time about the solutions or the third-party solutions, SaaS solutions that I'm using. So let's go back on the consent where the GDPR came around, and now we are stuck with this. With all respect, let's go to www whatever, and then we need to consent, and then we finally have a user experience. So you can imagine that every company out there that needs to follow the official legislation needs to send an email to a customer if they want to test a new tool. How many emails will be sent on maybe a weekly basis to them? It's like, well, company X, they want to try this and this tool for future references. How comfortable is that? I mean, I understand that from a PII perspective, but from a usability and user perspective, it feels like being spammed, although you want to innovate. So, going back to the speed and the legislation and the technology, I think we are not speaking the same language at some point in time. Although I respect that everybody has their own part and we need to restrict some things, but this is a biggie.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, I didn't think about legislation, but I love that you brought it up, because it's kind of in our lives, right? And like you mentioned, GDPR is the bane of my life. Like data legislation globally, it's similar but not the same. So again, I guess AI legislation in Europe or the Americas or Asia Pac are probably going to be different, even in those, in the specific countries in those regions. And like you say, if you need to get consumer consent with the speed of evolution, and I guess what that means, Ray, is how you release things, how you test things need to be well thought of and constructed, because like you say, you can't go and ask for consent every week, right?
No,
But then
no.
there's a challenge there with your innovation. Like you're having to slow it down. Is that kind of where your head goes?
Well, actually, it doesn't slow down. My brain maybe thinks about a creative option. Now let me give an example. Actually, I'm trying to figure out some solutions where AI workflows would be beneficial in-house, but also maybe externally. And we have systems like HubSpot, kind of similar. It seems that I'm not eligible to use a basic, maybe even AI or MCP connection to the platform without getting consent or just sending a notifications to my customers. And there are creative options to say, okay, well, maybe get a sandbox, get some sample data, which could be a good option, but you're not testing the right thing. Where personally, I would say it would be really cool that solutions like HubSpot, not saying that, so HubSpot is the issue right now, but solutions like HubSpot, they could have a development environment, a sandbox, where they automatically strips down the PII. This way, a technology isn't been, from an innovation stand, pushed back. So I can still continue and innovate and get a solution up and running that can actually be presented to the board to explore and actually be implemented. Where now the AI and the legislation, pushes us back in actually being flexible, being agile, doing so. So it's actually more time, more money by following these rules.
I like the fact that you use the word agile there, right? And I'm going to use the kind of more term agility, right? And as software engineers, as engineers as a whole, we're very used to having agility in the way we operate. Now, what's interesting from what you're saying is these SaaS providers, and like you say, you mentioned HubSpot, but there's a million other SaaS providers using it.
A million.
Notion is another example that I use all the time. And rightfully, they're integrating AI solutions within their services, but they need to also provide the consumers of their service agility, and when legislation is considered, right? And maybe that curve needs to happen. And I think we all forget we're still very early on in our AI life cycle, right? We've been talking about data for maybe 20 years, and even there, it's still evolving. So we're at the birth of AI still, in my opinion. So I think that's a really good point. I think there's a need, a driver for these SaaS platforms, whoever they are, to consider agility for their customers, because that again drives further innovation within those businesses.
Indeed, that's all about adoption. And I think, as you mentioned, and you make a really good point, although AI has been around, for a couple of decades already, now we're actually getting into the nitty-gritty details where it becomes commodity for a lot of people. And I think this is where true restrictions, and I think that's the good, the bad, and the ugly, of engineering. But I think that we will learn and adapt as quickly as possible, where it doesn't hold us back, but also helps us to integrate.
Yeah. Okay, Ray, I'm gonna do a change of pace here, and I want to talk about the biggest challenges that you're currently facing. So I mean, happy for you to talk about innovation, AI, but really, the world of innovation is changing, and for you, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing to be able to be productive within your organization?
Well, I guess it's always about timing. I mean, with the never stopping overload on so many tools. I mean, I try to watch at least 2-3 webinars a week.
Yeah.
I try to follow as much newsletters out there, but actually, that's just absorbing the data, and all of a sudden you need to strategically focus on how can this be an option, while you still spend time on, learning about it. Is this something tangible? while having this, I would say, vision. I just recently updated our AI vision document internally and for our stakeholders. So it needs to match. And, although wording can change, technology evolve over time. It's all about, setting priorities, having a flexible architecture that can be implemented. And let's give an example. And I think we all know Lego. And I would consider MCP or maybe A2A as one of those Lego blocks. Adopting the flexibility and creating these connections help us more or less, but I guess everybody to drive this in an efficient manner. And then the question, of course, is, are we doing this in-house or are we actually using strategic partners that focus on this specific niche to help us? Because you can imagine back in the day, a lot of things were happening in-house, but now I've been speaking to a lot of companies out there where we, well, hopefully, first of all, find a good fit, but also help us with this specific task. So it's like, one piece of the Lego block or just, a couple of Lego blocks building the whole framework within that flexible architecture where it's, I would say, being in the e-commerce space for a couple of years, composable. So removing elements and adding elements that doesn't interfere in the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think what you kind of spoke about right at the beginning, right, really highlights that abstract challenge in the sense of there's so much change, and for you to be able to absorb, I love the word that you used there, absorb that knowledge and then reconstruct it back into a strategy for your organization to drive innovation. As a mental challenge, that's got to be really tough because your job is not just to play, it's to deliver. And that change, that constant flex, it's really interesting that you're saying, I like your analogy of Lego actually, because your job is to understand, it's not necessarily always to do. And actually utilizing the correct partner and doing whatever yourself and maybe having the correct frameworks is an opportunity to innovate at pace, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And it needs to be scalable as well. And then let me give an example on the flexibility where it's not just me, but actually the adoption within the organization. Last week, I was working on some fine tunings within OpenAI. And actually, once you have everything, working, et cetera, from an adoption standpoint, it's easier to scale. So they really created, I would say, a flexible solution where, let's say, copywriters or the marketing department and even technical engineers can use this additional tool within OpenAI instead of using ChatGPT to, well, get the best output from that prompt they create, reusable for whatever document or code or whatever they're trying to craft. So from that perspective on the flexibility and scaling that is already innovation. Back in the day we didn't have that functionality, and now with tools like Windsurf or Cursor or whatever IDE from an engineering perspective we are able to create code just based on a couple of prompts. How efficient would it be to have that model being fine-tuned specifically to these business needs? Because actually it's more cost-effective than pre-training, but using already a good model and adopting that. And I guess that's basic knowledge. So it's more or less enablement internally, which can be adopted pretty quickly, I would say, instead of hiring new people. So it's a new skill that you need to train, I guess, from an AI perspective within the internal company, which is, to my sense, doable for everybody. It just needs time, confidence, patience. And then I would say the team, your internal team, will over time adopt AI more quickly instead of being frightened on losing their job, which I'm hearing all the time. But it's like, again, playing with Lego back in the day when we were young. I mean, it didn't matter what we built, and if we had the same color blocks, we just built and we liked it. And if we didn't like it, we trash it away and we start rebuilding again. So I would say use the Lego blocks within your organization to start learning and playing and make errors. And over time, you probably have this really beautiful boat or house or whatever thing you had in mind you wanted to build.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that kind of using the building blocks and breaking it down if it's wrong and just going again, right? It's such a good analogy. So I'm going to try to draw a conversation to an end here, but my final question for you, Ray, is I want to abstract away from AI and really think about innovation. And innovation during periods of rapid change, because so for me, I mean, I've been around the block a little while, and you often see these pockets, and I think AI is very different, but you do see these pockets of rapid change and adoption from not only industry, like, the technology industry, but from industry at large, right? And cloud was a very good example back in the 90s, I guess, and early 2000s. And for me, that rapid change is going to keep happening. And I think it's just it's happening more often, and those cycles are quicker. So if you're in charge of innovation within your business, or if you have the opportunity to innovate, what's the bit of advice that you'd give to someone of how you manage that during rapid change? How do you innovate during rapid change?
I like that one. Actually, one thing always stands out for me personally, and actually it doesn't have to do with IT at all or technology. It's the organization. So if we invest in, I would say, the change muscle, so we have an organization that's flexible enough, has an open mindset where we are having a growth mentality, and instead of being scared about the technology that's maybe a couple of years ahead of us, and adopt it, learn from it, onboard, enable your team, have them leading the way. And maybe a really nice analogy, I would say, from the movie 300 is if we look at the movie, there was only a small group of people, 300, that needed to conquer, what's out there. So let's put that analogy in there. So if we are strong and we're doing this together and we get thrilled and excited, we use the technology to our benefit, where the adoption actually leads the way, and we continue.
Do you know what? I really, really love that. And I think that's such a great place to end this conversation, because you're absolutely right. Innovation and change is not about the technology. It really is about, and I love how you phrased it, around having a change muscle and exercising that change muscle, because you're absolutely right. To adopt, you've got to have done it and failed and learned how to communicate with each other and carry on, right? And you also mentioned growth mindset. So you use words that I absolutely love, because it absolutely is that, right? It's not being afraid of change and not being afraid to learn. So I think that's a really great way to end our conversation, Ray. Ray, it's been great speaking to you on this. Really appreciate you taking your time for me.
Well, appreciated being on. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ray, who's also been, by the way, one of our quiz participants. I think he came to an honourable draw with Alex. I can't remember. Anyway,
did, yeah.
they had a quiz battle earlier. Loved it. Very interesting conversation. A couple of things you kind of know already. The never-ending pace of all of these things. We comment on it almost every episode, but great to hear from Ray's perspective within innovation. Kind of challenge of the evolution of talent requirements was a really interesting point that I picked up on, and the fact that, and this is probably predictable and not a great surprise again, but interesting to hear it. Legislation is struggling to keep up.
I'm going to talk about the last point first. For me, legislation not keeping up is going to be a big challenge, and it's going to really hold back what the technology can do. However, I was actually speaking to the BSI, so the British Standards Institute, a couple of weeks ago, and they feed into ISO. So they, from a UK perspective, they help write ISO standards, and this has been recognised from a BSI point of view, in the sense of regulation and legislation cannot hold back innovation. So what the BSI are doing, they've created multiple working groups to work with industry to help drive legislation faster and regulation faster, and make it more appropriate for commercialization of technology as well. So as much as we are not there today, it was really nice to hear what's coming from these standards makers. And it feels like the speed of innovation will be okay. I think it's not going to be as fast as we all want it, but I think there is change happening. So yes, definitely a challenge, but I was warmed by what the person at the BSI said. I just want to touch on one more point that you said, Andrew, which is the evolution of recruitment, and I think this is huge. I'm recruiting at the moment, and recruiting for a developer, and we pushed out a test, and we didn't allow the participant to use AI as part of the test process, as much as we're happy for our engineers to use AI in their day job. Now, I think that is going to change. I think that's me being slightly older in terms of going, is this an okay way of doing it? But I think we're going to get job roles and engineers and AI specialists that are all about AI. And actually, when you interview them, you want to interview their AI toolkit as much as you want to interview them as a human being. So I think the evolution of talent is going to be huge, and I think this is the big shift that I'm seeing. So I remember the cloud shift from 15-20 years ago, but I think this shift with the introduction of AI is different, not from a technology point of view, but definitely from a talent point of view. From the acquisition to all the way to the different job roles that we're going to have. So yeah, super interesting point.
Fascinating. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Sanjay. Now, as a final surprise, Sanjay, final flourish, don't think that the removal of the quiz and other little elements of our historic podcast has meant that there isn't now space for the limerick. So I am bringing back the limerick, not every episode, you'll be pleased to hear, but I am bringing it back. And I did have a little play around and some thoughts on a pivot-based limerick, which actually evolved into two limericks. So you have two for the price of one, Sanjay. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. I'm eager. Yeah. Very eager and ready.
All right. Okay. Here we go. Here is version 1, and I'll explain how version 2 morphed out of this one. But here's version 1. So, the startup was soon in distress as the market seemed less than impressed. A pivot was tried, switched goals on the fly. Now the VCs are keen to invest.
Nice.
Okay. All right. Listen, I take that as a relatively warm response from Sanjay. I've had worse, I've had better, but I had a quick rethought about it. And here's a little twist on that first one. So I've got a twist on the limerick. You ready?
Ready.
Here we go. An AI startup was soon in distress. It's a mirage, the founders confessed, but the board was impressive, the buzzwords expressive, and so the VCs still queued to invest.
Oh, that's quite hitting, that one, isn't it? That's very hitting. I really like it.
On that happy note, everybody, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.
Bye, everyone.